boredom is the cost of mastery. You're never going to master anything without the boredom piece and continuing to do things in spite of, I just don't feel like doing it. It's boring.
Josh, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Good.
So, like you just said, we're talking about the plateau problem today.
Yeah. Yep.
I have a problem with that.
Do you have a problem? You have a problem with plateaus?
I do. I don't like them. They're hard to move past.
Everybody reaches plateaus. Even mountain climbers do, though. You know.
Did you see the I forget what it's called, but there's a special on Netflix about this guy, the guy who free climbs.
Yeah.
Did you watch that?
I didn't watch that special, but he's always intrigued me.
This dude's crazy.
He's definitely an adrenaline junkie.
What's that?
He's definitely an adrenaline junkie.
He doesn't even tell people when he's free climbing. Like, why would you not tell people?
Because he doesn't do it for anybody else. He does it for himself.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
You know?
Yeah. I can't even watch that because I would just...
Really?
I just get sweaty palms.
Really?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I find it fascinating.
It's fascinating, but like the what do you call those city parkour people who climb those buildings?
Yep.
I get sometimes I actually get nauseous watching it.
Really?
Yes.
You got issues.
I guess so.
I know a guy. I'm just saying, I know a guy that can help you.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Cool.
But anyway, like we're going to talk about plateaus today, and I guess that free climber, he doesn't have plateau problems. You know what I mean? Other than the fact that he's disappointed after he gets to the top of El Capitan, and there's no more mountain to climb. But other than that, I don't think he has plateau problems.
Oh my gosh.
But for the sake of our conversation, we're talking about plateaus. About really, a plateau is that period of time when progress slows down after some initial gains.
Sure.
You know, and so we're going to be talking about how to keep going even when nothing really feels different. And so that's kind of the plateau, is really we're working towards something and we've made some initial progress, and now we've kind of normalized that progress, and it feels, for lack of better terms, it feels boring. That's
Sure.
kind of what a plateau is. Or you're not realizing gains at the same pace that you were when you initially started.
Yeah.
So for example, someone that's really on an intense weight loss journey, they may initially start to lose a lot of weight very quickly, but at some point that'll plateau.
Yeah.
Because your body's achieved a new normal.
Yep.
And our homeostasis will start to creep in, and our body's not going to want it to change that much anymore. So that's kind of an example of a plateau.
Kind of feels like the law of diminishing returns.
Yeah. Yep. And so kind of talking about, why our momentum starts to go quiet with these plateaus is most people don't quit because things get hard.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to quit, or we tend to give up when things get flat. So we're not getting that same feedback anymore that we get from making gains or making progress. And it's at those flattening moments that it becomes more difficult to move on, because motivation kind of dissipates a little bit at that point. So the early phase of a goal achievement, or of trying to accomplish something, often brings, quick wins and visible improvements, kind of like what I touched on just a minute ago.
Yeah.
But inevitably, progress slows, or it appears to slow. And in those moments, essentially what's going on is the effort continues, but the payoff becomes subtle or invisible.
Sure.
And so that's kind of really what we're talking about when it comes to plateaus. So today we're going to be talking about the plateau, but we're not going to look at it as a failure, but we're going to look at it as a predictable phase of our growth. And if we can look at a plateau as something that's going to be there, or as a step along the way, it's a lot easier to manage our expectations of plateaus once they do arrive.
Sure. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first, let's talk about what it is, and we've kind of defined it a little bit, but from a neurological and a psychological standpoint, plateaus are a chemical reaction, or they're a reaction to what's going on in our environment. They're not a moral issue. Sometimes popular culture likes to identify plateaus as a moral issue. Like you've lost your motivation, you just need to power through it because there's something wrong with you because you've reached a plateau in your journey.
Right.
But that's really simply not true. Really early change, as we talked about, produces that rapid feedback And in our society, we're used to and we crave that rapid feedback because of the dopamine hit that it gives us.
Right.
And we get that rapid feedback because novelty on new tasks or novelty on new projects or whatever goals that you have, novelty is typically high, and the gains in that initial stage are very, very obvious. However, later on, change will require refinement, more consistency, and tolerance for boredom, especially in our society when we're looking for quick fixes and instantaneous feedback. That becomes more and more of a challenge the longer we work on something.
So you said early change is driven by novelty.
Yep.
Does that mean that motivation is almost always temporary by design?
It is often temporary. That from the standpoint of that emotional, I call it emotional motivation, so that excitement we feel about engaging in a task or engaging in something new.
Yeah.
When we talk about motivation from that standpoint, yes, that is very temporary. And you're going to need more than just that emotional feedback or emotional excitement that we describe as motivation in order to kind of push through on some of the goals that we have or what we're working on.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If we expect to always have that emotional rush about engaging in something, we're going to be disappointed because at some point the novelty, as I say, will wear off.
Right.
And then we're left with, what systems have we put in place to continue on pushing towards what we want to work on.
Sure. Okay.
So, what I would argue is that if you've hit a plateau in your personal life, in your work life, in whatever area, it doesn't mean that it's stopped working. It just means that it's working more quietly as far as the motivation piece goes. So really when we reach a plateau in our lives, it means that we've reached a point where we've kind of normalized the process and we've normalized what we're doing.
Sure.
And it just takes a little bit more effort to kind of keep ourselves moving forward in the direction we want to go.
Sure. Okay.
But the challenge is that plateaus often feel discouraging.
Right.
And it's important to understand that humans are wired to respond to contrast, not stability. So when we start something new, we get feedback, physiological feedback that feels good, and it feels like we're actually accomplishing something and working on something. That's contrast. It's different than what we have done before, and therefore we perceive that we're making big changes and making big progress.
Right.
Right? So we're wired to respond to that contrast. We're not wired to respond to stability. All right? So essentially what I'm saying is that the brain rewards change more than maintenance, right? When you talk about maintaining something, well, that sounds really boring. But when we're talking about let's change something, that sounds new and exciting, and there's novelty attached to it that gets us excited.
So I got a question about that. So if the brain rewards contrast more than stability, are we kind of wired to sabotage long-term progress?
I wouldn't say we're wired to sabotage long-term progress. I would say we're wired to notice things that are new, and we're talking about like a dopamine system. So when you meet somebody new, or when you're engaging in a new activity, or you're going somewhere for the first time, that rush of excitement and that happy feeling that you get, that's a dopamine hit. And our brain is wired to respond to new and novel situations in that way. And so when it goes away, we notice it and we look to have it back. We're essentially addicted. We enjoy having dopamine. Dopamine is part of our reward, the reward center of our brain. And so we're constantly looking for rewards, which is kind of why, do we intentionally sabotage ourselves? Absolutely not. But what I would say is once something's been normalized in our lives, as far as working on a project or a goal or whatever, once we've been working on it for a while, if you're relying on pure emotional motivation or pure dopamine hit to move past the plateau, it's going to be more of a challenge.
Sure. Okay.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
The other challenge is we've talked about plateaus from the standpoint that they're essentially a drop in feedback, right? So when that feedback, that positive feedback that we get from working on something new, when that drops, something kind of has to fill that void. And in our, usually for human beings, when we stop getting that positive feedback about something we're working on at that plateau, doubt can then creep in, and we start to question if what we're working on is really is really worth it. Like let's take this podcast for example. When we first started it, it felt more exciting probably than it is now, and certainly I continue to enjoy doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But once it stops being
Shiny,
super exciting and shiny and new, we're like,
Yeah.
well, is it really worth doing? Are we really impacting the way we want to impact? And so that's kind of an example of how doubt can creep in.
Mm-hmm.
Or comparison. If we compare ourselves to somebody that's been doing a podcast for the past 20 years, then it can get discouraging as well. And so we have to kind of rethink how we address the plateaus that we reach in life.
So comparison creeps in during plateaus. Is that because we're actually behind, or just because we've lost internal feedback? Or
It's because we're asking why, I would argue. So to kind of go completely different from what you were essentially pointing at, the reason doubt increases is because we're asking, why am I doing this? Is what I'm doing worthwhile? Do I want to continue doing this? I don't know. It's not as fun as it used to be. And so the reason doubt increases is because we start questioning what we're doing. And if we're not grounded and we don't have a belief about what we're doing as to why it's important to us, that's when that doubt can really increase, and it's much harder to push past the plateau that we've reached.
Okay.
I would say though that plateaus aren't the absence of progress, and that's part of the challenge, is that we have interpreted plateaus, sometimes at least, to mean that we've stopped making progress, which really isn't true. If we're continuing to work on the systems that we have in place to reach our goal or to finish our project or whatever personal goal that we have, we're still making progress. What I would argue is that when we experience that plateau, it's more, rather than the absence of progress, really a plateau is the absence of novelty, or it's the absence of newness that we've to achieve.
One thing I've found is that sometimes old habits suddenly look attractive, right when I'm actually more stable, or I have that consistency than I've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
Why do old habits suddenly seem so appealing? Probably bad.
Because it's like
bad habits.
Yeah, it's like riding a bike. You never really forget how to ride a bike, even though you haven't ridden it for many years. And so, but when you haven't done it for a while, it's kind of appealing to go back to it because it's familiar, it's comforting, and suddenly what's old after a time
becomes new again.
Feels new again, and so it's chasing that dopamine hit to an extent.
Okay.
We're really human beings, and I'm painting a very broad stroke here, but really we as humans we're just a bunch of not adrenaline junkies, but I'm saying dopamine junkies, right? We like dopamine. I mean, when we meet someone that we love and that we've missed for a while, we get a dopamine hit because we're back with them.
Yep.
That's the way our brains are supposed to work, but we also have to know that sometimes it can kind of be detrimental if we're not paying attention to it.
Sure. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. So there's three ways, John, that people respond to plateaus, and I kind of wanted to tease that apart a little bit for listeners. The first way that people respond to plateaus is abandonment, right? Mm-hmm. And when someone hits a plateau and then they abandon what they're working on, they're essentially concluding that the approach that they've had isn't working, and therefore they're going to quit. The reality is, if we abandon what we're working on once we hit a plateau, it means we're quitting too early. So we obviously like to talk about fitness and whatnot. I think it's easy and it's tangible to understand. If someone that's on a weight loss journey loses a lot of weight in their first month, but then plateaus that second month, and if at that point that they abandon the plateau, they're essentially concluding that the approach, which worked the previous month, isn't working, and therefore they're going to quit. The problem with that is if we don't push through plateaus in some way, we're essentially quitting too early and selling ourselves short.
How can someone tell the difference between, like, this really truly isn't working, or this just isn't exciting anymore, I'm not seeing the progress that I was expecting to receive anymore? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think you have to take a realistic look at the results that you have. So if we're going to use that example of weight loss, let's say they're 2 months in. The first month, the individuals lost a fair amount of weight. The second month, the weight loss plateaued a little bit. to look at that objectively, you would say, okay, over the course of these past 2 months, I have actually lost X amount of pounds, rather than saying, well, this month I haven't lost anything, therefore it's not working. That's a distortion of reality. Actually, it did work.
Right.
It's just your body is adjusting. And so abandoning the goal or abandoning the systems that you've put in place doesn't really make any sense. Now, if you go 6 months without cheating, I would add, and nothing has happened.
Legitimately following your plan.
Yeah, legitimately following the plan. Then you can look at, well, maybe what I'm doing here really isn't working. But you have to look at it objectively rather than emotionally. If the standard is it doesn't feel new, it doesn't feel like I'm making any progress, then you're going to make a poor decision. Whereas if you look at it objectively, you're going to have a better chance at success.
Sure. Okay.
And I would argue that you're not going to, if you look at it objectively, you're not going to abandon it. You're just going to adjust it. And we'll talk to that in a second here.
Sure.
So the first way that people respond to plateaus is abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The second way is escalation. Now, what do I mean by escalation? Escalation is essentially doing more instead of doing better. It's doing busy work. Because something's not working, therefore, I'm just going to do more of it, and hope it works out.
Mm-hmm.
And that the problem with that is it often leads to burnout because we feel like we're spinning our wheels, and it leaves us exhausted. The third way that people can respond to a plateau, which is the best way, is through adaptation. Adaptation is essentially adjusting expectations, adjusting metrics, which is how we determine if we've achieved a goal or not, and adjusting the strategy without restarting. So we talked about abandonment. So someone that abandons something or a goal or whatever they're working on, they just quit it altogether. Somebody that's reached a plateau and adapts to the plateau takes an objective look at it, a non-emotional look at it, and then they adjust the expectations. They adjust the metrics or what they're striving towards or their goalposts, so to speak, and then their strategy for achieving it. So the person that's on a weight loss journey, if they've hit a plateau, rather than throwing up their hands and saying, oh my gosh, this is not working, I'm just going to quit, why bother trying? They'll look at it and they'll adjust their expectations, because if you did research on weight loss, anybody would tell you, or the research would show, that you're going to hit a plateau at some point.
Right.
They would adjust their expectations. I'm not going to lose 50 pounds a month forever, right? Obviously, I'm being excessive for the sake of conversation. And then they would adjust the strategy. So, okay, rather than walking 3 days a week, I'm going to try walking 4 days a week. Things like that.
Sure.
So they'll adjust the strategy without completely restarting everything.
Right. So, I mean, adaptation sounds mature, but it's less dramatic.
Right.
So, but why is the adaptation can be, for me, it's unsatisfying, because I'm like, okay, what I did wasn't working. Now I have to adapt. I have to change some things. I'm like, okay, for me, it feels kind of like a failure. Why is it unsatisfying for so many people to make changes?
I think that lies in the expectation of perfection. So when we set a goal, let's say we're setting a goal of something, if we set a goal and we don't 90% of the time we're not going to reach our goals the exact way we plan them out. That's why we write them down, so we can readjust if we need to. And so that's what adaptation does, is it says, okay, this is what I plan to do. I still want to get there. This may have worked for a little bit, but now I need to change course. And to some extent, I think the reason why people don't like doing that is because it admits that our initial plans weren't perfect, and and so there's that fear of failure, that shame associated with failure.
Especially if you're taking like a plan from something that you saw on the internet.
Right.
And it's like they say, oh, this will work for you, hands down, guaranteed, and then it doesn't. Like, okay, well, I'm a failure.
Right.
You
Yep.
have to because I have to adapt, because it doesn't work for me. It works for everybody else.
Yeah.
I know you have to move on here, but I just had a real quick question about the escalation piece.
Sure.
Is it sometimes just panic dressed up as discipline?
Say that again.
Is escalation, so doing more instead of doing better, leading to burnout? Is it just like, oh, I'm panicking, I'm not getting the results I want, so I'm just gonna do more of the exact same things just to force it to work?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just kind of more like a panic, or like maybe panic's not the right word.
I think what you're talking about is an emotional response.
Yeah.
So rather than looking at it objectively,
it's not really discipline then.
And adapting to it,
yeah.
it is, okay, this worked previously a little bit, so therefore if I want it to work a lot, I need to do way more of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an emotional response rooted in, I need to get this better, I need to correct it right away.
Right.
But sometimes doing more and doing excessive amounts of extra work doesn't necessarily mean you're doing it better. It doesn't really mean, if you're not adjusting your strategy, you may not be met with success. Sometimes it'll work. I would argue that if you're just escalating the amount of work that you're doing, would ultimately lead to burnout. So let's look at some of this into weightlifting, for example. If they're not seeing the gains that they wanted to see in their bench press, for example, if you were to apply an escalation strategy to push past the plateau, one would say, well, I'm going to, rather than bench pressing twice a week, I'm going to bench press 5 times a week, and every day I'm going to add weight. You know what I mean? Like that obviously that's a very extreme example, right. And I think we can both conclude what would happen by the end of that week.
Right.
That would lead to burnout. In this case, it would lead to injury.
Sure. Okay.
So that's kind of when people are not frantic, but when people are trying to just apply more of the same and trying to do more of it, that's what I'm talking about when it comes to escalation.
Sure. Okay.
To kind of wrap, so again, the 3 ways people respond to plateaus: abandonment, escalation, and adaptation. Obviously, adaptation is the healthiest way to approach it. And what I want to tell people is that mature momentum or mature motivation, it isn't louder, it's just steadier. And so when I talk about mature motivation, I'm talking about being able to continue doing something once the novelty has moved on.
Sure.
That's mature motivation. It's matured over time, and you're doing it because it's important to you, not because you have that emotional fix from participating in it.
Sure.
So then how do we move through a plateau? Assuming that we're going to use the adaptation approach. All right. Mm-hmm. The first one is you can change the metrics. So when we talk about metrics, it's what are the goalposts that we're striving for. So metrics, they measure consistency, recovery time, or effort quality. Look at those things rather than the actual outcome. Certainly we want to look at the outcome and have the outcome in mind, but look more at making sure your systems are set up the right way to get you there, and then trusting in those systems, and then focusing the metrics on the quality of your efforts rather than actually achieving the outcome in that exact moment.
Okay, so not necessarily, so focusing on what you're doing, not the end result. Because I was going to say, changing metrics makes sense, but some listeners might hear that as lowering the bar, and it's not really that.
No, it's not lowering the bar at all. It's changing the steps along the way. So you look at, let's just talk about goals. If you have a goal of running a marathon, okay, you map out your goal and you have it all mapped out. You're running and everything. If you feel like you're not moving forward with your fitness as far as the number of miles that you run, for example, what this would look like is, rather than looking at number of miles ran, you would look at how consistently am I running, and is the quality of my runs there? Is my nutrition locked in? Those kinds of things. And so it'd be trusting the steps you have set up and the systems you have set up, and then measuring your metrics against your participation in those systems rather than the end goal of successfully running a marathon. That end goal is still there, and the person will still get there, but they're looking more at those shorter term objectives or metrics in order to reach it. So change the metric. The other one is shorten the time horizon. So rather than focusing on the end goal, the running of the marathon, focus on the next week. I'm going to run 12 miles this week rather than wanting to achieve the end goal of the marathon.
Right,
yep,
okay.
That's all the shorten the time horizon is. So look at more temporary time limits rather than stretching it out.
Okay.
The next way to move through a plateau is what I call refinement. So refine your goals, don't reinvent them. And I always call this a 5% rule. So rather than blowing it all up because you've hit a plateau, focus on improving one variable by 5% rather than trying to completely upend it.
So when you say refine and don't reinvent, how do people avoid the urge to blow everything up when they're bored?
Because people need to understand that whenever you blow everything up and start over from scratch, you're essentially writing a new goal. And that's where the mature motivation has to come in rather than the emotional motivation. People that are mature about what they're trying to achieve in life or what they're working through understand that I need to stay consistent over time rather than completely reinventing things. If you go every month by completely rewriting goals or rewriting what you want to achieve because the previous month it didn't go as planned, you're never really going to achieve anything because you're not working towards something consistently over time.
Sure.
That makes sense.
Yep.
So refine, don't invent. And the next one is to normalize boredom, to move through a plateau. That's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
You have to understand that boredom is often the cost of mastery. So if you look at individuals that are successful in any way of life, whether it's in their personal lives or whether it's in their career or fitness or whatever area, if you just sit down and talk to them, and I have a book in my office called The Tools of Titans.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those interviews will state, and these are interviews with very successful people, like, how did you get where you're going? They would say, it's in the day-to-day boring routine.
Yeah.
It's in the day-to-day boring routine. The same thing over and over and over. And often boredom is the cost of mastery. You're never going to master anything without the boredom piece and continuing to do things in spite of, I just don't feel like doing it. It's boring.
I suppose people can kind of take that and twist that too. Like, it's better. I'm bored. I'm not doing anything. So therefore, I'm mastering something.
Right. Doing nothing. Doing nothing is a big difference. Being bored and doing nothing is different than being bored while you're doing something.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can guarantee you, people that are runners, halfway through their long run of the week, at some point they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is boring, right?
Yeah.
But they continue to do it. So being bored in that moment. And I think boredom is one of those things that we have very low tolerance for right now.
It seems like we've been taught to avoid boredom at all costs.
100%. It's because of these devices we carry around. So if you look around at any social gathering, as soon as there's downtime, most people pull out their phones and they start doom scrolling, I call it, right? Just do a social experiment sometime and look around. I was at a function over the weekend, and there was a lull in the time between activities, and I looked around the room and everybody had their heads down scrolling through something, rather than interact with people around. Or if you go to a park, like when I bring my youngest son to a park in the summer, it used to be that there was a boredom associated with like going to a park. The parent would sit on the bench and be bored watching their child play. That doesn't really exist anymore. Now, when parents bring their kids to the park, most of the time the kids will be playing and you'll see the parents sitting on the bench, their nose down on their phone. Now, I'm not judging people for using their phone, but we've lost the art of being bored and being okay with it.
Right. Some of the best things happen when you're when you're bored. Sometimes it's
best thinking happens.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like shower thoughts and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's sometimes I've started practicing being bored a little bit more, and it's actually really kind of nice.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up the shower thoughts. Why do people have ideas in the shower? We don't all have ideas all the time, but why do things pop up in the shower? Because that is actually the one time now, as long as you don't have one of those screens in your shower, but that is the one time where you're doing a mundane activity that you don't have to think about, and therefore your brain is not distracted by something else, because you literally can't have your phone in the shower with you. I suppose you could, because they're waterproof now, but typically you don't.
Right.
And so you're doing something mundane you don't have to think about. You're on autopilot. Suddenly your brain is free to think about other stuff,
right.
And it's free the creative juices start moving because the brain is idle, and that's when thoughts. That's why we get the shower thoughts.
And that's why meditation is so important.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. Okay, so normalize boredom, and then the last tidbit to kind of move through a plateau is what I call to borrow perspective. So what do I mean by that? Borrowing perspective means that you compare where you are now to where you started, not an imagined endpoint. So rather than looking to the future, to what you want to achieve, take the time to kind of look backwards and see where you've been and where you've come to because of what you've been working on. And it's just kind of a shift in perspective. And it forces us to look at what progress we have achieved rather than the progress yet to be achieved.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, one example is a lot of times it feels like relating to our business, it feels like for me a lot of times that we're just constantly plateaued.
Right.
We're not really making a whole lot of progress as fast as I want, as I'd like to, grow as quickly as I want to, add more team members to our programs. But then when I was actually looking back at it, at our progress over the past several years, and it's remarkable. Yeah. The growth that we've had.
Yep. And to that point, it's important to redefine what we call progress.
Yeah.
Progress isn't always felt, and growth often occurs before it's even noticed. So it's kind of like the person that's an overnight success. No, they're not an overnight success. No. It's years of doing the same mundane thing over and over and over until the growth exploded on an outward, as an outsider looking in, right?
Champions are only recognized in the ring.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yep. They didn't just show up there that one day and suddenly did it, right?
Right.
There was a lot of work they put into it.
Yep.
So stability, and I would also argue that stability itself is an achievement. If an organization can achieve stability, or if we as people can achieve stability, that in of itself is also an achievement. So it's important to redefine progress in that way.
I gotta say, I like it when our business is boring.
Right. Exactly.
I really do like that.
Yeah. And so to kind of start summing it up, I would, what I want to leave people with is that hitting a plateau in your life, whether it's your personal life, your work life, wherever, that's not where our motivation or momentum dies. It's actually where it becomes sustainable. That's where sustainable growth happens over time. Mm-hmm. Anybody can go on a crash diet where they eat only once a day and lose a lot of weight, but that's not a sustainable lifestyle change, right? So when we hit the plateau, that's where we realize that what we're doing has worked and it will continue to work, and it just becomes more sustainable. Mm-hmm. All right, so to close, I always like to close with a little mini challenge. So this week, I'd encourage people to think of one area where things feel flat. Is it your goal of reading? Is it your writing? Is it your work life, your relationships, physical fitness? So identify one area where things feel flat, and then I would argue don't quit. Don't escalate. Just adjust one variable by 5%. And why do we change things by 5%? Because anything more would be overwhelming, and essentially you're throwing everything out. But if you adjust one variable by 5%, it's making a small change that can move you past that plateau and give you some motivation.
So one last question from me. So if someone tries that and they feel nothing, what do you want them to remember?
I would argue that most people don't need more motivation. This is my closing point. Most people don't need more motivation. They need reassurance that quiet progress still counts.
Enough said.
Enough said.
Josh, thanks so much for doing this. I always appreciate being a part of this.
Well, thanks for your challenging questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put me on the spot a few times.
I decided to finally start asking some questions. Our producer, Jessica, she's like, John, you gotta start asking some more questions. Come on. So thanks, Josh. I really appreciate this, and I know I'm going to be making some 5% changes this week. So we'll see what happens.
Great.
I'll see you guys next week.